Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to share something that has the power to shift your mindset, bring peace to your heart, and ignite courage in your soul. It's not a secret formula, not a life hack from the internet, but a truth rooted in the Word of God. A message so powerful that if you start your day with it, your life can truly change. I'm talking about Psalm 27. Psalm 27 begins with a bold declaration. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Let those words sink in for a moment. Psalm 27 opens with a declaration so powerful that it has echoed through centuries. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? These are not just poetic words. These are the words of a man who had every reason to be afraid, yet chose to believe in something greater than the threats around him. This is the heart of bold faith, a faith that defies fear, not because danger or hardship is absent, but because God is overwhelmingly present. He had enemies plotting against him, armies rising up, even close friends who turned on him. Yet in the face of all that, he did not begin Psalm 27 with a list of complaints or a plea for help. He began with identity and assurance. The Lord is my light. Not might be, not hopefully, but is. That present tense confidence is what begins to shift everything inside us when we read and declare these words each day. Fear is one of the most common human emotions. It comes in many forms. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of the future, fear of loss, fear of not being enough. It creeps into our minds in the quiet moments of doubt, and it shouts loudly in the storms of life. Fear can paralyze, distract, and even destroy if we let it. But Psalm 27 doesn't tell us to ignore fear. Instead, it gives us a reason to face fear with faith. Faith in the biblical sense is not blind optimism. It's not pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It's not a warm feeling or a spiritual platitude. Faith is confidence in the character and promises of God, even when the situation around you seems uncertain. David had every external reason to panic, but he looked beyond the physical and remembered the spiritual reality. The Lord is my salvation. That is the truth that steadies a trembling heart. Light and salvation. Those two words carry profound meaning. Light brings clarity, direction, and hope. Salvation brings rescue, freedom, and victory. When David called God his light, he was saying, even when things feel dark, God is the one who shows me the way. And when he called him salvation, he was proclaiming, God is the one who saves me, not my skills, not my army, not my circumstances. He said, my God is the one who saves me, not my skills, not my army, not my circumstances. He said, my God is the one who saves me, not my circumstances. That truth builds a foundation that fear cannot crack. Many people begin their day with fear already looming. Fear of what might go wrong at work. Fear of the unknown. Fear that they'll fail again, be disappointed again, or face a situation they feel unequipped for. But what would happen if, instead, you began your day like David did? What if, before the headlines, before the emails, before the doubts, you said with boldness, the Lord is my light and my salvation. whom shall I fear? That single sentence has the power to reframe your entire mindset. You move from victim to victor, from reactive to resilient, because you are anchored in the reality of who God is. This kind of bold faith doesn't mean you'll never feel afraid. Even David had moments of deep anxiety and sorrow. But what makes Psalm 27 powerful is that it teaches us how to respond to fear. Not by denying it, but by confronting it with trust. When fear says you're alone, faith says, God is my stronghold. When fear whispers, this is too much, faith replies, the Lord is my strength. When fear tries to convince you that you'll fail, faith holds on to the promise that God will never leave you nor forsake you. Bold faith isn't something we muster up once and keep forever. It's something we choose daily, moment by moment. It grows as we continue to trust God in both small steps and big storms. It gets stronger every time we say, I will not fear because the Lord is with me. This is why starting your day with Psalm 27 is so life-changing. You're not just reading a psalm. You're setting the tone for your entire day. You're reminding your soul who is in control. Imagine going into a difficult meeting, a tense conversation, or a major life decision already grounded in this truth. Imagine facing a diagnosis, a job loss, or a broken relationship with a heart that has already declared, the Lord is my light and salvation, whom shall I fear? That's not arrogance. That's confidence rooted in divine security. In a world that constantly feeds our fears through news, social media, and uncertainty, this psalm becomes a daily shield. It renews your mind and strengthens your heart. It doesn't make problems disappear, but it shifts your perspective so you can face them with peace. And in that peace, your faith grows. It's also worth noting that faith is contagious. When your family, your co-workers, or your friends see you facing life's challenges with courage and calmness, they'll wonder where your strength comes from. And you'll be able to point them to the source. Not your own willpower, but God's unshakable presence. On the flip side, when you put your faith in God, God takes on the scarcity for you. Huh? When you put your faith in God, God takes on the scarcity for you. When you put your faith in God, God takes on the scarcity for you. When you put your faith in God, God takes on the scarcity for you. Fear wants to define your story. But Psalm 27 gives you a different script. It invites you to step into each day, not with dread, but with declaration. Not with anxiety, but with assurance. Not with trembling, but with trust. Because if the Lord is your light, then no darkness can overcome you. If the Lord is your salvation, then no enemy can destroy you. And if the Lord is your stronghold, then you are never truly vulnerable, no matter what life throws your way. God distracted your enemies by saying, he who is the Lord is your stronghold. Then you are never truly vulnerable, no matter what life throws your way. So start each day with this powerful message. Say it out loud, write it down, speak it to your heart until it becomes your natural response. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? When that truth becomes part of your daily rhythm, you won't just survive your days, you'll live them with boldness, purpose, and unwavering peace. In the middle of Psalm 27, there is a striking and deeply personal verse that reveals the heart of David. One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. This verse is more than poetic. It's revealing. It shows us what David truly longed for. Not riches, not victory, not even safety, not giving the music too distinct. One thing I ask from the Lord, not riches, not victory. What he desired most was to be near God. He wanted to dwell in God's presence continually. And from this verse we discover a life-altering truth. The presence of God is not just a comfort. It's our greatest need and most powerful priority. In a world that constantly demands our attention through screens, notifications, schedules, responsibilities, it is easy for the presence of God to be pushed to the background. Quiet time with Him becomes something we squeeze in if there's extra time. But David flips this thinking on its head. He doesn't treat God as an afterthought or an emergency contact. He makes intimacy with God the main pursuit of his life. He says, "One thing I ask." Imagine that. If you had one request, one thing to strive after above all else, what would it be? For David, it was simple: to dwell with God. This longing did not come from a place of obligation or religious duty. It came from deep affection. David had experienced God's presence before, in the pastures while tending sheep, on the battlefield while facing Goliath, in caves while hiding from enemies. He knew what it was like to walk closely with God, and he knew there was nothing more satisfying, more sustaining, or more secure than being with Him. So when he asked to dwell in the house of the Lord, he wasn't just asking to be in a physical place. He was asking to live in a continual awareness of God's presence every moment of every day. This is where many of us struggle. We want to be close to God, but life gets loud. Responsibilities pile up. Pain creeps in. Distractions multiply. And before we know it, our days are full, but our hearts feel empty. We're spiritually dry, emotionally drained, and wondering why we feel distant from God. The truth is, we were never meant to live apart from His presence. We were created to walk with Him, talk with Him, and experience His nearness in the rhythms of everyday life. Psalm 27 reminds us that starting your day in God's presence is not a religious checkbox. It's soul nourishment. When we make His presence a priority, everything else starts to align. Not because life becomes perfect, but because our perspective changes. When we spend time gazing on His beauty, as David says, we are reminded of His goodness, His power, His mercy. We begin to see the world and our problems through the lens of who God is, not how overwhelmed we feel. There's something sacred about the stillness of morning, before the world stirs, before your mind begins to race. It's in those moments that you can create space for God. Whether it's a whispered prayer, a quiet reading of Scripture, or a simple moment of silence, you're not just doing devotions, you're entering into relationship. You're aligning your spirit with your Creator. And in doing so, you are laying a foundation for the rest of the day. The more time we spend in God's presence, the more we begin to reflect His character. We become more patient, more loving, more discerning. We start to crave what He desires. We become less reactive and more responsive. Instead of rushing into our day with anxiety, we walk into it with confidence. Instead of being led by our emotions, we're led by His Spirit. This is the power of prioritizing His presence. David says he wants to gaze on the beauty of the Lord. That word gaze implies intentionality. It's not a glance, it's a lingering look. It's not hurried, it's focused. In other words, David wanted to be captivated by God. He knew that what we focus on shapes us. If we fix our eyes on problems, fear will grow. If we fix our eyes on people, we'll constantly compare and compete. But if we fix our eyes on God, on His beauty, His faithfulness, His Word, our hearts will be filled with peace and purpose. This kind of seeking doesn't just happen by accident. It's something we must pursue with intention. And it often begins with a simple choice to quiet the noise and turn our hearts toward Him. It might mean waking up a few minutes earlier. It might mean putting your phone aside first thing in the morning. It might mean learning to sit in silence without needing constant stimulation. But in those quiet spaces, God speaks. In those surrendered moments he feels, when God becomes your one thing like he was for David, your life begins to change. Your decisions are no longer driven by pressure, but by presence. Your identity is no longer shaped by the world, but by the Word. Your hope is no longer rooted in outcomes, but in the God who walks with you through every season. Even in times of chaos, when everything feels uncertain, those who dwell in God's presence have an anchor. They have a peace that passes understanding. They have a joy that isn't tied to circumstance. They have a strength that is renewed daily, not from within themselves, but from the one who never grows tired or weary. Psalm 27 doesn't invite us into a one-time experience of God's presence. It invites us into a lifestyle of seeking, dwelling, and gazing. It invites us to begin each day not with stress or busyness, but with stillness and surrender. It invites us to begin each day not with past conflict, but with stillness and surrender. It calls us to remember that the most important part of our day is not our to-do list, but our time with the one who holds all things together. So when you wake up tomorrow, before you check your messages, before you step into the noise of the world, take a moment and pray like David. Lord, let me dwell with you today. Let me see your beauty. Let me walk in your presence. You'll be amazed at how this simple prayer, this simple posture, begins to shape your days and ultimately your life. When you make God's presence your priority, everything changes. You begin to live with clarity, courage, and calm, and most importantly, you begin to experience the life you were always meant to live, not distant from God, but delighting in Him every single day. At the end of Psalm 27, David leaves us with a powerful, almost whispered instruction that speaks directly into the restless parts of our hearts. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. He doesn't say it once, he repeats it. This repetition is not accidental. David, having lived through delays, dangers, and divine timing, knew that one of the hardest yet holiest things we will ever do is wait. Not wait with bitterness, not wait with impatience, but wait with trust. Waiting is something most of us struggle with. In today's world, we are conditioned for speed. Fast food, fast internet, instant updates, next day delivery. We're taught that waiting means weakness, that delays are problems, and that if something doesn't happen quickly, it must not be working. But in the economy of God's kingdom, waiting is not wasted time. It's transformative time. It's the space where trust is built, where faith is tested, and where character is formed. David knew this deeply. Before he became king, he was anointed by the prophet Samuel as a young shepherd boy. But that anointing didn't lead to a throne the next day. In fact, it led to years of running, hiding, and enduring hardship. Imagine being told by God that you were chosen for greatness, only to spend the next decade dodging spears, sleeping in caves, and being falsely accused. David lived in the tension between promise and fulfillment. And it was in that tension that his trust in God was refined. This is what makes his words in Psalm 27 so profound. He wasn't speaking from comfort. He was speaking from experience. Wait for the Lord, he says, not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. Waiting on God is not a passive act of doing nothing. It's an active decision to believe that His timing is better than ours, that His ways are higher, and that His plan is still unfolding even when we can't see it. When we wait for the Lord, we are choosing to release our timeline and rest in His. That requires humility. It requires letting go of control and choosing to trust that God sees the whole picture while we only see a piece. It's admitting that we don't know what's best and choosing to believe that He does. And in that surrender, something beautiful begins to happen. Our hearts become stronger. Our faith becomes deeper. Our confidence shifts from what we can do to what God is doing. There's a hidden strength in waiting. That's why David says, be strong and take heart. Waiting on God doesn't drain your strength. It actually restores it. God doesn't drain your strength. It actually restores it. Isaiah 40:31 echoes this promise. But those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. In the natural, waiting can wear us out. But in the spiritual, waiting strengthens us, because it roots us in the everlasting faithfulness of God. The problem is we often confuse silence with absence. When God seems quiet, we assume He isn't working. But the truth is, some of God's greatest work happens behind the scenes in ways we cannot see. Just like a seed planted in the soil, growth is taking place long before anything is visible above the ground. If we give up too soon, if we pull the seed out because we don't see results, trust grows in the waiting because it teaches us to hold on when nothing around us looks like it's changing, and still believe that God is faithful. Sometimes the waiting season reveals things in us that need healing: pride, impatience, fear, or insecurity. It exposes where our trust is really placed. Are we trusting God, or are we trusting the outcome we want? Waiting strips away the illusion of control and invites us into deeper dependence on Him. It teaches us to pray not just for results, but for relationship. We stop asking God to rush and start asking Him to refine us. And make no mistake, God is not cruel in His delays. He's kind, patient, and always purposeful. What feels like a setback may actually be protection. What feels like a detour may be preparation. The longer the wait, the greater the potential for growth. The delay may not be punishment. It might be the very space where God is forming the strength you'll need for the next season. There is also something sacred about choosing to wait with hope. Waiting doesn't mean you stop dreaming. It doesn't mean you stop praying. It means you place your hope not in your timeline, but in God's faithfulness. You keep showing up. You keep trusting. You keep believing that God is who He says He is. And the God is you who He says He is. And in that process, your heart becomes more aligned with His. David's instruction to be strong and take heart acknowledges that waiting isn't easy. It takes courage to keep trusting when prayers aren't answered yet, when doors haven't opened, when healing hasn't come. But that's why he repeats the invitation, wait for the Lord. Because it's in the waiting that we often encounter God in the most intimate ways. It's in the stillness that we hear His voice more clearly. It's in the quiet that we realize He has never left. When you start your day with Psalm 27 and carry it in your heart, you are reminded that waiting on God is not a pause in your purpose, it is part of your purpose. God is not just preparing the blessing for you, He's preparing you for the blessing. And sometimes the longer the wait, the more sacred the outcome. God's timing is not just good, it's perfect. So if you're in a season of waiting today, know this: you are not forgotten. You are not off track. You are in a sacred place where trust is growing, where faith is being deepened, and where God is closer than you realize. Take heart. Be strong. Keep waiting, not with fear, but with faith. Because those who wait for the Lord never wait in vain. And when the breakthrough comes, and it will, you'll look back and see that the waiting wasn't wasted. It was the very place where God was drawing you closer, teaching you to trust, and preparing you for what only He could see ahead. In the very first verse of Psalm 27, David opens with a declaration so bold, so full of conviction, that it immediately sets the tone for the entire psalm. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? These are not the words of a man living in comfort or ease. They are the words of someone who has walked through the darkest valleys, stared down death, and still chosen to trust in God. David does not deny the presence of fear. He simply refuses to be ruled by it. And this is the powerful truth that Psalm 27 brings into our lives. When we live by faith, fear loses its grip. Fear is one of the most common human emotions. It comes in many forms. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of the unknown. It sneaks into our minds quietly, whispers lies in the silence, and tries to convince us that danger is certain and hope is foolish. But Psalm 27 offers us a different way to live. Not a life without danger, but a life without domination by fear. David had every reason to be afraid. He had enemies pursuing him, armies surrounding him, betrayal from close companions. And yet in the middle of all that chaos, he chooses to say, my heart will not fear. Even then I will be confident. This confidence doesn't come from self-reliance or pride. But I do pray the Lord stay with me this year, generation from now, my son. It comes from knowing who God is. David calls God his light, meaning God brings clarity in the dark, direction in confusion, and comfort in uncertainty. He calls God his salvation, meaning God is his deliverer, his rescuer, his eternal hope. And he calls God his stronghold, meaning God is his protection, his shelter, his secure refuge. When you know who God is, you no longer have to live in the shadow of fear. Faith isn't pretending that threats don't exist. It's choosing to believe that God is greater than the threats we face. Fear shrinks our world. It limits our choices and steals our peace. It makes us second guess everything and keeps us from stepping into the fullness of God's plans. But faith expands our perspective. It lifts our eyes above the storm and reminds us that the one who created the universe is still in control. Faith doesn't eliminate hardship, but it gives us strength to endure and overcome. David's faith allowed him to face enemies with courage, to endure betrayal with hope, and to keep moving forward when everything around him told him to give up. There is a deep connection between fear and focus. What we focus on shapes our emotions. If we fix our eyes on problems, uncertainty, and worst-case scenarios, fear will grow stronger. But if we fix our eyes on God, His Word, His promises, His character, faith will rise. That's why David could write such a confident psalm in such troubled times. He wasn't blind to the threats. He simply chose to lift his eyes above them. He chose to see God as bigger than his battles. Psalm 27 shows us that faith is not just a feeling, it's a discipline. It's something we choose and practice, especially in moments of fear. David speaks truth to his own soul. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. He doesn't wait for his circumstances to change in order to find peace. He finds peace in the presence of God, even while the battle rages on. This is the kind of faith that transforms how we live. It doesn't depend on what's happening around us. It's rooted in who stands with us. Sometimes fear disguises itself as wisdom. It tells us not to take risks, not to trust again, not to hope too much. But faith reminds us that obedience to God is always the wisest path. There may be fear at the edge of that calling, that dream, that act of forgiveness, or that leap of faith. But if God is leading, we can walk forward with confidence. We don't need to wait until we feel brave. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to trust God in the midst of it. Psalm 27 is not just a psalm for kings and warriors. It's a psalm for every person who faces anxiety, uncertainty, or opposition. It's for the one lying awake at night, overwhelmed by what tomorrow may bring. It's for the one walking through grief, wondering if joy will ever return. It's for the one standing at a crossroads, unsure of which way to go. In every one of those situations, faith becomes our anchor, our shield, our compass. And the concept of faith is that faith brings comfort. Faith doesn't make life easier, but it does make us stronger. It reminds us that God is not distant or indifferent. He is near and He is involved. He sees the threats we face and He surrounds us with His presence. David says in verse 5, "For in the day of trouble He will keep me safe in His dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of His sacred tent and set me high upon a rock." That's the language of protection. When the language of God doesn't just help us survive trouble, He lifts us above it. This kind of security doesn't come from circumstances. It comes from a relationship with the living God. And that's the heart of Psalm 27. David's faith was not generic, it was personal. He didn't just believe in God, he knew God. And the more your faith grows, the less power fear has over you. Even in his concluding words, David returns to this theme of courage in the face of fear. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Waiting on God, as we've seen, builds trust, but it also builds courage. Fear tells you to run, to hide, to give up. Faith tells you to stand, to hope, to endure. When you wait on God with faith, fear no longer makes the final decision in your life. God does. So whatever fears may be pressing in today, whether they are external threats or internal battles, Psalm 27 offers you a refuge. Not by denying the danger, but by reminding you who your defender is. The same God who delivered David, who walked with him through every valley, is the same God who walks with you now. He is your light when the path is unclear, your salvation when you feel surrounded, and your stronghold when the world shakes. Faith is not a magic shield that removes all problems, but it is the daily decision to trust in the one who holds your life in his hands. When fear whispers lies, faith speaks truth louder. And when you start each day with the powerful message of Psalm 27, you are not just reading ancient poetry, you are declaring war on fear and inviting God to lead you forward in boldness, peace, and unshakable trust.